I'm Enid Silverman, and this is Artist to Artist. For this show, our 3rd anniversary special, we have a special show. Our guest is an expert on art who's going to show us America's best-loved paintings and artists, including Winslow Homer and Frederic Remington. She has a master's degree in art history from the University of Chicago. She has helped train the docents at the Terra Museum of American Art, and she has done the lecture circuit for 16 years. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the joy of art with Claire Cross. Welcome, Claire. It's so nice to have you here. I'm looking forward to this show.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Enid. Thank you.
How did you get involved in the art business?
Well, it started many years ago, a volunteer job I had with the Junior League of Evanston. It was a committee called Art in Schools. And we used to go into the North Shore public schools with slide programs on American art, and we would key them to their social studies curriculum. And I wrote a program with another woman on the black artists in America for the Evanston schools. And once in a while someone would say, would you come and do that program for our women's group? And we would do that. And then in 1976, officially, I went on the lecture circuit with a program on American art, and it was the bicentennial year, so it was a very, very good timing, and it was very successful. And then I've been expanding and growing ever since.
What does lecture circuit mean? Where do you go?
Oh, I go to so many different places. This afternoon I was down in Palos Park at the Palos Park Women's Club. I have done art associate groups of the Art Institute, professional groups, you name it, garden clubs. I do lots of garden clubs. I have 4 different lectures on gardens because there's such a market for them in the Chicago area. There must be thousands of garden clubs around Chicago. So that's been very interesting.
And today we're going to talk American art. Where are we going to begin?
Well, we're going to start out with folk art. We're going to start in a time when art was very easily understood by the average viewer.
That sounds like a long time ago.
Yes, it was not a time, Enid, when a long-haired goat with a tire around its middle was called art. Or a row of Campbell soup cans was called art. And this is all with due respect to Robert Rauschenberg and Andy Warhol. But let's look at one of the earliest forms of art in America, folk art. And that is the common gravestone. And this is the gravestone of Captain John Fowle.
Gee, that is really beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful? It's so ornate because they had to pour all their expression onto the gravestones because the churches would not allow decoration on the inside. As they said, we don't want any fancy work in the house of God. This was the time of the Puritans, of course. Now, this later stone from Connecticut is very interesting. It's sandstone, 1795. This one shows images of the deceased. There are actually 4 faces on this stone, and it tells a tragic story of 4 brothers who all died in one of the many epidemics that ravaged these early colonies.
Is that the family tree in the middle?
Well, yes, that's so sad, Enid, because look, 4 branches are broken off, and I look at this and I hope the other branches mean they had other children. But it does remind us, don't you think, of how harsh life was for the early Americans. Let's go to another form of folk art, and that is the weather vane. And the subject matter of weather vanes relates directly to the times in which it's created. We look at this rooster, and of course we know the rooster was a common denizen of the farms, and then horses that had set speed records were particularly popular. Of course, this was a horse-oriented society. Even the pig, the common pig, found its way under the rooftops. Now, we're getting real close up to this pig, and I wanted to show you something. You're noticing those pock marks. These are bullet holes, Enid, because shooting at weather vanes was a popular macho sport in those days, and certainly not today because weather vanes are very collectible, and ones like this are very, very costly.
So we're in the early 1700s at this point?
Yes, we are in 1800s. Folk art, of course, spans centuries, but I'm just going to show you early examples of folk art. Let's go on to The Peaceable Kingdom. This is probably one of the best loved folk paintings. It's by Edward Hicks, done in the mid-1800s. He was a Quaker minister. Peaceable Kingdom he painted in over 100 versions.
I know that. Can you
Yes.
believe that? 100 versions?
Well,
he
he felt very strongly about this subject. It was his vision. Now remember, he was a Quaker. His vision of a future peaceful world based on the 11th chapter of Isaiah, you know, the part where the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. But let's go on and look at The York Family by J.H. Davis. And we're kind of honing in on a detail of this slide because I wanted to show you how typically J.H. Davis, the pattern of his rugs just run riot in contrast to the rather bland, pasty faces of his sitters. Let's go on and look at, I'm afraid, a rather grim-faced pair here. I wanted to show you this because it's from Illinois. It's from Lombard, Illinois. It's by Sheldon Peck, 1838, Angul Crane, and granddaughter Jeanette. Now you can see by this that folk artists were ignorant of academic ideals, and luckily so were their customers. You know, they just blithely painted to the best of their ability.
So there's no modeling, no shading, no perspective.
Perspective
but
is very
those that
tilted
wanted
up,
portraits, there were no
right.
cameras to compete with.
That's quite true. And this next work is the Talcott family, and you know, you just have to never mind that they're sliding forward on a tilted up floor, and their dresser, if you'll notice, is lurching in the opposite direction. Folk art, in its own way, goes straight to the fundamentals of art. And as an artist, Enid, maybe you've noticed this, rhythm, design, balance. It has broad, flat areas of splashy color, such as in Ami Phillips' Oil of 1834, and this is Girl in Red Dress. And Phillips is one of the most extraordinary folk painters. His portraits are extremely valuable today. There are 500 extant, and notice how he puts the emphasis on elaborate costume. He always has dark backgrounds. They're very suave, elegant.
So would we call this primitive art, naive art?
Yes, those are other names that you could give this art. So, as someone said, folk art is art by folks, for folks, of folks. I'm going to end with
Sounds
one
good.
of my favorites. It's The Cat, and it's by an anonymous painter, and it's kind of a surreal work. You could almost call it the cat's dream, because I think this untrained artist has certainly captured the essence of what I would call catness, or cat as predator. Look at him. He's got a bird in his mouth, and he's eyeing the next bird that he's going to grab. So I think this painting, more than any other, shows how much fun folk art is. It's so easy to relate to. It's so honest and unpretentious.
Well, the artist gives a lot of themselves.
They
They
certainly
might not
do.
have technical skills, but they're giving of their own thoughts and feelings.
That's quite right, and it's just so appealing. It's certainly not art for art's sake, is it? Folk artists did not have to live up to standards of relatively trained artists, and my next artist is John Singleton Copley, and we're looking at Lady in a Blue Dress. Now, he is the most gifted artist of the colonial period from Boston. You may recognize this. It's from the Terra Museum of American Art on North Michigan, one of his 350 Boston portraits, and shows his attention to that beautiful, rich fabric, that satin fabric, and his plastic clarity, his exquisite craftsmanship. Let's look at Paul Revere. You know, Copley was...
Isn't that great?
Isn't that
He gave a
wonderful?
certain dignity to his subjects.
He certainly has, but notice dignity, but also it's so vigorous and unpretentious. I mean, he's in his shirt sleeves. He doesn't have his hair powdered. He doesn't have on a wig. In the close-up, you can see the silver teapot that Paul Revere has made, and he's holding it on his leather hammering pillow, which is out of, that we cannot see in this slide. Well, you know, when the English Artists Establishment saw Copley's works, that out of the howling wilderness of our country, such an artist could come, they said, you must flee provincial America for worldly London. And he did on the eve of the Revolution, and he never came back. Let's see what his work began to look like after he got to Europe. It becomes more sweeping, more Baroque, theatrical. And this is Watson and the Shark.
This was actually based on his friend's experience, wasn't it?
That's
A true story where
quite
his